Okay, welcome back. Let's take a look at using storage policies. And in this example, we'll show you doing this with traditional storage. Remember, traditional storage, we mean things like VMFS and NFS, which also, by the way, means that the policy that we're placing on our virtual machines is a reporting tool more than anything else. It's not going to enforce this, right? So, again, we're going to create storage policies and show you the process for doing this, especially when you're using storage policies to create tiered storage. Now here we have a good example of when you don't have VASA enabled storage, you're going to do this with tags instead. So that will be our discussion here, and also you'll have a lab of demonstrating that. So here's the procedure. Basically what you need to do in order to implement storage policies, you first have to have storage that can be used for the storage policies. What do we mean by that? Well, we'll take a look, but basically you need VASA enabled storage or tags. Then we'll have to create a storage policy component or 2 or 3. Now that all depends if you want to use IO filters or not. If you want to use IO filters, you'll need storage policy components. There are some already pre-built into the vSphere environment for the built-in filters. So there's components ready to go for encryption and for prioritization. But if there's third-party like replication and caching, you'll add those. Next, you then create the storage policy that's going to be making use of either the placement on the storage that you've implemented the environment for, whether it's VASA or tag-based. You might add storage policy components if you would like to add some filters to this. So you can pick and choose. Do you want both a placement part to the policy? Do you want to have a IO filter element to your policy? But that's the process of creating a policy, selecting the rules that your policy is going to dictate. Then you apply the policy to a VM or more, and finally go ahead and check to see is your VM compliant with the policy that you just assigned the virtual machine. So step 1, configuring storage to be used for storage policies. That again means you're either going to have storage that's got VASA implementation. So that means that you've got the VASA enabled capable storage, but also you've got a storage provider on that storage that is registered in vCenter. That's what we're making sure we all have the prerequisites. In order to have a placement policy with VASA, I will need to have VASA enabled storage with a storage provider, and then have my vCenter server registered with that storage provider so that we can learn all the different capabilities that the storage is providing, so we can choose which of those capabilities that we're going to put into our policy. If, on the other hand, you don't have VASA enabled storage, well, then it's going around and setting up tags on each of the different data stores. Since we don't have a way to learn about the capabilities through vCenter or through the vSphere client, you'll do this by working with the storage team and applying tags to each and every different data store. Maybe a set of data stores that have a gold tag, another set of data stores that have the silver tag, and so on. Even maybe just create a tag category first called storage tiers, and then make the gold tier part of that and make the silver tier part of that. Those are the tags that'll be part of the storage tags or the storage tiers tagging category. So we need to make sure we have all that implemented at a time, right? VASA for VASA enabled storage with the storage provider, or tags already implemented so that we're ready to go. Then, if you would like to add IO filters or data services for your environment, well, then it's a matter of setting up storage policy components. Right? So you define the components in advance so you can then use them in your storage policies. So as we see here, there's actually 4 built-in storage policy components making use of the 2 built-in features with regards to IO filters, right? We have the default encryption filter, right? Or I should say we have the default storage policy component for encrypting virtual machines using the encryption filter. And then there's also the 3 different prioritization storage policy components that let us define prioritizations using storage out of control. So they're already there, right? You can go ahead and create your own. And you notice here, when you select a storage policy component, you then will provide the category. So what's the category? Well, that's going to be, is it encryption? Is it storage out of control? Is it replication? Is it caching, right? You have your 4 categories, and then you will need to provide who the provider is, right? So for encryption, there's encryption, and then for the IO control, there's IO control. But if there's caching or replication, you'll need to make sure you have the storage provider already set up that we did in the first task, right? Get the storage providers already registered in our vCenter system so that you can specify that here when you're setting up a policy component. Then you go ahead and create your storage policy. You do this under the Profiles and Policies section in the vSphere client, just like you find the actual components in that same section. But you go ahead and create a policy, and the policy is going to ask you, okay, well, you're going to give the policy name first, and then when you get to the next page, it'll ask you, well, would you like to enable host-based services? These are your IO filters or your data services, right? As it says here, create rules for data services provided by hosts, right? So if I would like to add one of those, I can select this checkbox. And down here, data store specific rules. These are the placement policy rules that we can apply. Now, normally what you'll find are two checkboxes. One that says enable rules for vSAN, if you've got a vSAN in your environment. If you don't have vSAN, this won't be an option. And then enable tag-based placement rules. You'll always have this as an option because this is what is kind of the default. If you're not using vSAN, if you're not using VASA, if you're not using virtual volumes, those all have a requirement of having a storage provider. So vSAN has a storage provider, virtual volumes have a storage provider, VASA storage, without being virtual volume specific, also has a provider. So if you don't have any of those providers, you will always have the ability to have a tag-based rule, if you like. So in any case, we've got the two here. We'll go ahead and choose a tag-based placement rule. So you choose those two, and what you'll notice is that the items over here will adjust accordingly. If I choose to enable a host-based rule, it'll show up. That will be your next step once you hit the next button. And then if you choose one of these, it'll then add those to the mix as well. So here we decided to go with a tag-based rule. So if you have a tag-based rule, that means that we're basically going to then have to apply a tag, right? So you'll choose tag-based rule in the first checkbox, and then over here you'll be asked, all right, well, this is going to be called the silver tier policy. This is actually the first page of the wizard. Choose that I would like to select a tag-based policy to do this, right? And then you will be prompted to then choose, okay, which tag category would you like to apply? The storage tiers category. So we create this category first and then started creating a whole set of different tiers. So this is what we had to do ahead of time. We created a gold tier and a silver tier that are part of the storage tiers category. So here we are creating a policy called the silver tier policy, which is going to be basically made up of the silver tier tag. And then you again should have had this done ahead of time. You would have had already tagged a set of data stores with the silver tier tag, because what will happen next is it will show you, well, here are all the data stores that are compatible with this new policy you're creating. If you've already set data stores with the silver tag, it'll show all the data stores that have that silver tag already applied, so you can verify, oh, I already have some data stores that will work for anybody who has this silver policy. So then how do you apply the policy to the VM? Well, there's two ways. You can apply the policy to the VM as you're creating the VM, like we are here, right? We're creating the VM, and then we get to the storage section, and we choose, we're going to give this VM the silver policy. Now, since we gave the VM the silver policy, what's the wizard going to do? It's going to help steer us to place the VM on the most appropriate storage. Since we actually did find that there was actually a data store that was compatible with the silver tier policy, well, it will show it to us right here. If I have a silver tier policy, there happens to be a silver tier compatible data store right here, right? This one here called SA Shared 01 Remote. This is the one that is completely compatible with our silver policy. All these other data stores are some other policy, or they're just not compatible with silver. So here's the thing though, it's not going to prevent you from selecting those, right? You're basically telling the system to tell you what's the most appropriate storage if I gave the VM a silver policy. So then it says silver, that's this data store. If I decided to give the VM a gold policy, it will probably show me one of the other data stores instead as being compatible with this policy. Now these are pretty small environments. This is very useful if you have hundreds or just dozens of data stores that are compatible with different tiers of storage. So then it would show you, okay, you might have 20 data stores that are silver tagged. So then, okay, I don't care which data store, but as long as it's silver, we're compatible. The other way you can apply a policy to the VM is actually just by going right into the VM's edit settings page. And in fact, there's a VM policy settings page you can choose right off the main VM's menu. And then there you just choose what policy, and then we'll show you whether or not the VM is compliant with that policy or not. By the way, once you have your VM's policies assigned, you can go ahead into the policy itself, dive right into the VM storage policies section and specify, all right, who's compatible, who's compliant with their policy. So here I have a policy called the Silver 2 policy. So I highlight the Silver 2 policy, check compliance. It will show me down here which VMs have been assigned this policy and which VMs are currently compatible with their assigned policy. So I can see here this VM called Photon02, who was assigned this policy, because that's what happens when you select this policy here. It will show all the VMs that have been assigned the policy, and the fact that this VM is actually compliant with this policy. So he's in the right place, which is good. All right. So now we're going to let you get a handle on trying this out. So in our next lab, number 5, we're going to basically create 2 data stores. One's, I think, an 8 gig data store. The other one is a 12 gig data store. They're roughly the same in terms of capabilities. They're just data stores in our training lab. But you're going to tag one with a gold tag. You have to create some tags, right? You have to create a storage category, a storage tier category. And then you're going to create a gold tag, and you're going to create a silver tag. And then you're going to assign the gold tag to one data store, assign the silver tag to the other data store. And then we're going to go ahead and create some policies around those tags. And then once you have policies based on those tags, we'll assign the policies to VMs to demonstrate what happens. In fact, you'll see you can assign the policy to the VM, and then what happens when you put the VM on a non-compatible storage, what happens to the VM? It'll get put on that other data store, but it won't be compliant with its policy. So then you'll see when you do put them on the right storage, of course, it'll be compliant with its policy. But this was our first lesson on actual storage policy usage. We saw the process of creating a policy and how we can use VM storage policies to create tiered storage. Go ahead and do the lab, and we'll see you in the next lesson.